Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is Two Way Tonight. Thank you for joining. Uh, there's certain stories that just rub me the wrong way. As a news person, as a citizen, as someone who's trying to have a conversation with the American people, be part of a conversation with the American people that's about our highest and best, not our lowest and least. That was John Ashcroft's kind of slogan for his presidential campaign. It's the greatest gap ever in the history of American presidential politics between the quality of the campaign and the quality of the slogan. It really wasn't a slogan, more like I don't know what it was, mantra. I don't know what it was. Anyway, all day on cable news and in my Twitter feed and in my inboxes, people want me to talk about this video of some Democratic members of Congress with national security and intelligence experience calling on members of the active duty military not to break the law. That's what they did. Seemed kind of not controversial to me, but the president now has said they should be killed for making the video, and it's a little bit hard for me to avoid covering the story and discussing it, even though I think it's just absolute bollocks. I'm not saying it's all the White House's fault, but I just don't understand. Usually, when I see crocodile tears in Washington, when I see people theatrically on their fainting couches, it's obvious that that's what they're doing. They're just ginning it up for political advantage. It seems like there's some people in Trump world who are actually very upset about this. It seems genuine, and I don't get it. I don't get why they're so upset. All these Democrats did was say, and Caroline Levitt today said they said they should violate orders. No, they said that people in the active duty military should violate orders. They said legal orders. They said the opposite. They should not. They should not listen to illegal orders. They should ignore illegal orders. Again, I'm not really sure why they made the video. I've seen interviews with them where they're not really clear about why they made it, and they act a little bit what's the right word? Like their hands are totally clean, like this was a normal thing to do. It wasn't really a normal thing to do, but again, I don't really think it's normal for the president to say they should be killed over it. But I find the whole thing to just be just a big distraction from, for instance, Dick Cheney's memorial service today was lovely. And for those of you who've heard me talk about the former vice president before, I was a huge fan of his. I just thought he's a great story to cover. But he was also an incredible patriot and public servant, and just really determined guy to make America better. And the service today, five former vice presidents, President Bush, who gave a great speech. I've got a soft spot for him too. And the Cheney grandchildren were just extraordinary. I hope my grandchildren, on the occasion of my death, give speeches as lovely as the Cheney grandchildren did. And then there's what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, a massive story. And late today, President Zelensky kind of said, "Yeah, we'll talk about this deal," even though the deal is just like a Russia deal. The whole thing's kind of intriguing. But my point is that those two stories, the Cheney Memorial Service, I'd like to just spend the hour showing that and having discussion about it, having Amber and Hyma talk about it, our two guests, and then maybe talk about the Russia stuff and take your questions and call it a day. But some of you are insisting explicitly and implicitly that we talk about this crap story about the video and the president calling for them to be killed. So I don't know what I'm going to do. Haven't decided yet. Even though you'd think, well, the show's underway, Mark, you probably should make a decision. I really don't know what to do about it. Anyway, we're going to certainly start with the Cheney funeral because I think it's an historic moment for the country. He's an historic figure. And again, I wish every one of you could have spent some time with the guy. Some of you probably have, but most of you haven't. Wish every one of you could have spent time with Dick Cheney. It's just an incredible guy. Incredible guy. And as always, I say the same thing I've said about other people who've passed. I didn't know him all that well. I know 1,000 people who knew him better than I did, but I feel extremely lucky as an American, as a journalist, as a student of Americana to have spent any time with him because he was just extraordinary. And I thought the tributes to him today were very fitting. Anyway, then there's the crap story about this video. J.D. Vance did this interview with Breitbart where he said a bunch of stuff. A lot of talk about the economy today, and a few other odds and ends. But those are the main three stories, and I would say the main two stories. So here's an interesting thing. I just looked down my Twitter feed, and there's a tweet from the mayor-elect of New York City that says "disgusting," a reply tweet. And I thought, well, what could he be saying that about? And now I see it. We'll talk about it on the eve of his trip to the White House, which is why it's germane. Well, I'll read it to you now. The Washington Post is exclusively reporting, this is their tweet. The U.S. Coast Guard will no longer classify the swastika, nooses, or the Confederate flags as hate symbols. The military service drafted a new policy that classifies them as potentially divisive. This is the kind of thing the Trump administration does that I'll never be able to totally unpack. It seems like not a great idea, no matter what the rationale is. And the mayor-elect says it's disgusting. Anyway, here's that headline from the Washington Post, number 21. U.S. Coast Guard will no longer classify the military service, which falls under the Department of Homeland Security, has drafted a new policy that classifies such items as potentially divisive. Again, I haven't had time to read the story. I can't imagine what that's about, why they would do it, but the mayor-elect says it's disgusting. Anyway, here's what's going to happen. A quick word from a sponsor. Uh, oh, all right. Now here's an update. Thank you for getting all this sorts of information. In a phone call with the Washington Post after the story published, the Coast Guard said it disagreed with the story and that considers the swastika a hate symbol, and it would look into the new policy changes which removed it as a hate symbol. We will be reviewing the language, so maybe it's not true, or maybe they changed their mind because the Post ran their story. Who knows? Anyway, quick word from a sponsor. Then we'll bring our guests in, and we'll watch some highlights from the Cheney Memorial, and then we'll talk about Ukraine. And then if there's time left, we'll talk about that story, which I've called Bullocks. What else have I called it? I forget. You know what I want to call it? I want to call it a bullshit story. It really is. And yet, some of you are saying, Mark, it's not a bullshit story because what the Democrats did was so outrageous. And some of you are saying, well, Mark, it's not a bullshit story because what the president did was so outrageous. And again, I've already made clear, I'm not really clear why the Democrats did what they did, but the president saying members of Congress should be killed for making a video, that's just bonkers. But I don't really want to talk about it because it's just bonkers. All right, here we go. Let's see. Oh, I see now. I see now why I'm confused. All right, our first sponsor tonight is our good friends at Cozy Earth, who are having a sale. Prices so low, they're insane. 40% off, 40% off Cozy Earth products, the whole site, everything on there. Go to cozyearth.com, promo code two-way. The bubble cuddle blanket, the jogger pants that I wear nearly every day. I'm going to a black tie event tomorrow night. I'm just this close to wearing my Cozy Earth pants. I'm not sure I'll get away with it there, but otherwise you can wear them anywhere. The pajama set, the sheets, the towels so soft. NFL Sunday, you'll just grab your Cozy Earth towels and just spread them around on the sofa or the lazy boy and just sleep with them, cuddle up with them. They're very soft. All this available now on the site. Crazy Black Friday sale. Stock up for gifts or stuff for yourself. CozyEarth.com, promo code two-way. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. Thank you for your attention to that matter. Go buy a bunch of stuff and you get a little pop-up. How did you learn about Cozy Earth? Mark told you about Cozy Earth. All right, here we go. I'm surprised and delighted our two guests didn't leave after my opening rant. Be on a show with a crazy man. Amber, welcome in.
Hi, Mark. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Amber Duke is generous with her time here. She loves the two-way community. She gets stops on the street in D.C. and they say, hey, you're the gal from two-way, aren't you?
That's they all the time.
Now, has that ever happened, really?
No.
No,
Sorry.
Okay. That's all right. It
It's coming, I'm sure.
It happens to some of our guests. Let's see if it's
I
happened to
believe
Hyma.
it.
Hyma, has anybody said to you, hey, you're the guy from two-way? Has that happened to you?
Well, it's actually happened to me twice, Mark.
Twice.
I got a friend down from New Orleans who said, "Oh my God, I just saw you on Two Way. It was awesome." And then a random person who I did not know said they saw me on the show. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. Love having you both on. Amber, I can't say why it doesn't happen to you because it happens to a lot of the people who appear. Mark Caputo, one of the top journalists in American history. He's like, no one's ever recognizes me for Morning Joe or anything I do. But then he goes to the hardware store and they're like, you're the guy from Two Way. So Amber, maybe you're wearing your hair differently or something. You need
it must be it. I will say though, I got a picture from a friend once. They were out in Clarendon in Arlington, Virginia, and the bar that they were walking past had Two Way on the TV.
Hilarious. That's hilarious. All right. Thank you again. I love having you both on and love having you on together. Thank you for being
Good to
here.
see you.
You both were born in like this century, so neither of you ever met Dick Cheney, I'm assuming, right?
That's right.
I've met Dick Cheney one time
Oh my goodness.
actually.
Tell us all
So
about it, Hyma.
I've been thinking about this all day. So thank you for bringing it up. But
Yes, sir.
he was down in New Orleans, and if you guys haven't visited the World War II Museum down in New
Yeah.
Orleans, please do
Incredible,
it.
incredible museum.
But
Incredible.
he was there for the Spirit of America Award with former Senator Lieberman, and so I was there with the former mayor, and I had a chance to go up to the Vice President Dick Cheney, and as people mentioned all day, he was a very serious and stoic guy. But I love presidential history, and obviously he's been someone who has been just so big in the history of our country over the last 30, 40 years. And so I went up to him. I said, "Hey, I'm a Dem. I just worked for Hillary Clinton. I love her, but I love you too. Is that okay?" And he was very kind, and we had
Yeah.
a very nice conversation. But he was really lovely, and it was just sort of like a young politico's itch was scratched by
Yeah.
meeting him. And he was just lovely, and like
Yeah.
you said earlier, it was so nice watching his memorial service today.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful story. And I bet he didn't give you a hug though, right?
Oh no, he gave me the
He-
sternest
yeah.
handshake and
Yeah.
quick little pat, and that was it.
Yeah. My favorite thing about the service today was the grandkids, and you should go watch the whole thing. The grandkids were all incredible. But my second favorite thing was the for President Bush's speech, and the line from President Bush's speech. He said, "If you met Dick Cheney and you were expecting a kind word and a hug, you had to accept the fact that you were just going to get the kind word. Not a big hugger, Dick Cheney, but just an incredible guy. I thought about writing something about him today, but I just, for some reason, I'm pretty good at capturing stuff. Typically, I can't figure out yet how to capture him. He's
Yeah.
just an unusual guy, but so funny and so kind, and this whole image of him as Darth Vader, and obviously he made decisions related to Iraq that are historically horrible, and but he did it, I believe, because he was really haunted by 9/11. Happened on his watch and the president's watch, and he just felt not going to happen again on my watch. We're going to do what we need to do, and clearly they made some mistakes. To state the obvious, but anyway, let's look at some stuff from the service. Just a remarkable. Now, I'll tell you that some of you are going to say, "Well, Mark, you're not prioritizing the right things," but let me tell you this. So struck by this. We talked in the morning meeting. Which cable networks are going to carry the thing? And we all agreed that nobody would carry the whole thing. Two of the three main cable news networks carried the whole thing, but not Fox. So once upon a time, you would have thought Fox would have carried it, and probably not. But because of Liz Cheney and because of Dick Cheney and their opposition to Donald Trump, MSNBC and CNN carried the whole thing. They
Yeah.
carried it. They carried it like it was Bill Clinton's funeral.
Hmm.
It was quite something. And Fox, I think Fox carried a tiny bit of it.
Hmm.
I don't know if they carried it at all. Very surprising, sort of. All right, let's look at some pictures. 1A, the Bushes and the Bidens and Al Gore. Again, there was a row of the former presidents and vice presidents, and there you see W on the far left and Laura Bush, and there's Joe Biden and Jill Biden. Jill Biden and Al Gore behind there. Jill Biden, I believe, was sitting next to Kamala Harris, and
Yeah.
if you were a student of their body language, there were long stretches where they did not speak to each
Hmm.
other, even though they were sitting next to each other. All right, here is 1D. This is a lovely shot. 1D. There's again Gore, and here's Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner sitting together, and you see Mitch McConnell in front of them. Let's see. Number 11, or I'm sorry, 1I, just to give you an idea of some of the people who came, and this might surprise some people. There's Rachel Maddow and Dr. Fauci sitting together. I don't know. Rachel Maddow, I'm pretty sure was close to Liz Cheney because of January 6th. I don't know anything about her relationship with Dick Cheney, but there she is. All right. So uh anyway, President Bush spoke, and their relationship is so complicated, the two of them, Bush and Cheney, and that deep stakes, where Cheney was the head of the search committee and famously picked himself, was incredible. And Bush's decision of why he ended up picking Cheney is an incredible story. But here is President Bush describing how Dick Cheney picked himself. Number 2, please.
25 years ago, I had a big choice to make, a big job to fill. I wanted to know all my options, so I enlisted the help of a distinguished former White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of Defense to lead my search for running mate. Dick Cheney and I went through the files name by name. We talked over the various qualities I was looking for in a vice president: preparedness, mature judgment, rectitude, and loyalty. Above all, I wanted someone with the ability to step into the presidency without getting distracted by the ambition to seek it. After weeks of these meetings, I began to have a thought I could not shake. I realized the best choice for the vice president was the man sitting right in front of me, and I told him that. At such a moment, most in this position would have jumped at the chance, but Dick stayed detached, and he analyzed it. Before I made my decision, he insisted on giving me a complete rundown of all the reasons I should not choose him. He also heard one of my top advisors was against the choice, so Dick invited him to make the case. As he did so, he sat there unfazed and expressionless. In the end, I trusted my judgment. I remember my dad's words when I told him what I was planning. He said, "Son, you couldn't pick a better man."
So it was funny because, the way the Constitution works, if two people are on the same ticket from the same state, both the vice president can't win that state's electoral votes. And if it's a landslide, it doesn't matter. But they knew it might be close, and so they couldn't risk. It ended up being Bush and Lieberman on president and vice president. That would have been a sitcom. Although, of course, Lieberman would have been fine serving with Bush, but that's a different story. So Cheney had to switch his registration. And of course, at that point, he lived in Texas because he was working for Halliburton. And so he had to go back to Wyoming to switch his voter registration. And NBC News broke the story that Cheney had switched his registration, which made it clear he was going to be the pick. So it's kind of how the story got broken. Cheney's closest aide for many years was Pete Williams, who was his aide when he was in Congress, and then in the Pentagon when he was defense secretary, and he worked for NBC News. And so some of us were a little suspicious that the way they broke that story, even though Pete wasn't the one who broke it, Lisa Myers was, but I always had a little suspicion that Pete might have handed that off. Anyway, here's President Bush also another soundbite from President Bush talking about what a great guy Dick Cheney was. Number 3, please.
I appreciate this chance to say a few words about a man I was proud to call my vice president and my friend. Though not a happy assignment, I do consider it an easy one, because there was so much to like and admire about Dick Cheney. Dick was a stoical man, and I doubt he left his life with any complaints about the time given to him or its end. He was also a grateful man, grateful above all for 3 loyal, loving women who shared in his journey. As I quickly discovered in 2000, when you choose one Cheney, you get 4.
Very true. Everything the president said about his running mate as vice president were true. Liz Cheney spoke, and we're not going to show you any of the grandkids because I've made it a policy not to cry anymore on the show this year. And I cried at the grandkids. I was on the subway listening. I cried on the subway. Not a good look. So go watch it yourself. But here's Liz Cheney, of course, a former congresswoman, and boy, a fierce defender of her dad. Liz Cheney, number 4, please.
He was inspired to service by President Kennedy. Dick Cheney became a Republican. But he knew that bonds of party must always yield to the single bond we share as Americans. For him, a choice between defense of the Constitution and defense of your political party was no choice at all. When he was vice president, he wrote in this letter to all of his grandchildren, "As you grow, you will come to understand the sacrifices that each generation makes to preserve freedom and democracy for future generations. And you will assume the important responsibilities of citizens in our society. I ask of you as my grandchildren what I asked of my daughters, that you always strive in your lives to do what is right."
All right, I'll say one more thing, and then I'd love both Amber and Hyma, I'd love for you all to just say what you wish about Cheney or about today. So Dick Cheney, even more than George W. Bush, reviled by the left when he was in the White House for 8 years. Reviled. Darth Vader and just the worst things possible said about him. And then his daughter attacked by the right after her participation in the January 6 hearings. I don't think the two of them disagreed about a thing. So in other words, you had the same two people with the same principles and the same policy positions, and yet from the Bush era, the last Republican president before Donald Trump, through the Trump era, Donald Trump so distorting the Republican Party, so changing the party, so changing the values of the party that one Cheney's reviled by the left, and then the other Cheney reviled by the right, even though they're virtually the same. And again, it's just a prism through which to view just how much the party has changed. Amber, thoughts on Dick Cheney, the day's events, my obsession with not talking about that other story, whatever you wish.
Sure. Well, I will talk about this separate from politics. Our co-founder and publisher, Neil Patel, worked for Dick Cheney for all 8 years of the Bush presidency, and he wrote an op-ed for us at the Daily Caller about his time working for him, and I found it to be very insightful. And Neil's views, I think, on foreign policy have changed probably quite a bit since he worked for Mr. Cheney, but still really respected the man. And he talks about how great of a boss he was, obviously very stoic, had a very dark sense of humor. And he recalled this story of when the Democrats and the media started calling him Darth Vader, that Neil found this incredibly well done replica Darth Vader mask, and he bought it for Dick Cheney. And not only did he take a picture in the mask, because he actually quite liked the nickname, but on one occasion he wore it into the Oval Office for a meeting with the president, and really got great enjoyment out of it. And he also talks a little bit about his background, being raised in a lower middle class family, getting the opportunity to go to Yale, not doing so well.
Only flunked out twice.
Right, ending up doing blue collar work, but then eventually becoming this larger than life statesman. And it's really a testament to the opportunity that exists in America, for people to really rise above their station and make the best out of opportunities. And so I found that very inspiring.
Is Neil's piece available free behind a paywall?
It's free.
It's free. All right, everybody should go read it. I didn't know about it, and I'm going to go read it. Hyma, one of the reasons I believe that Bush aide argued against picking Dick Cheney, and one of the controversies that arose when President Bush picked him was I think he was either the only one or one of 3 House members who voted against making Dr. King's birthday a holiday.
Yeah.
And that's the guy who was celebrated today on MSNBC. Again, just testament to how much has changed since he was in office. Again, you already told your fabulous story about meeting the vice president, but anything else you want to share or comment on?
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think history, as we know, is long, and we've learned from these big historical figures that while their lives may be inspiring, and to Amber's point, in so many ways, Vice President Dick Cheney's life is the quintessential American dream. But a lot of these giants do have past actions or things that they themselves have expressed regret for, and so I don't want to spend much time talking about that. But what we saw today, it was as someone who is a student of politics and just loves the theater of politics, and it's almost like watching, the royal wedding. When I woke up this morning, they were covering it so closely. But it was sort of a vantage point into a bygone era, and one that's slipping away from us every day. And so in some ways it's bittersweet, but it was really nice to see former President George W. Bush and see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Dan Quayle and all these folk in the same room for one mission, celebrating one person who has done so much. You can critique him and critique what he's done for this country down to each policy decision, but you cannot say that he has not done a lot for this country, from Congress all the way through being vice president. And it was so nice to watch that. And the backdrop of that, and Amber, I hate to talk about the politics of it, but not having the current president there, not having the current vice president there, that was sad. And when we have these moments, this is the second moment in the last year that the president, the vice president chose not to be a part of, or were disinvited, and that was George H.W. Bush, and fortunately for history, they were a part of Jimmy Carter's funeral. But look, I think this just shows that there is a chasm across this country that's growing. And when the president has an opportunity to close that chasm, he chooses to widen it, and that's sad. And I think this was a moment where he and the vice president could have stood up and brought this country together a bit more on the back of Dick Cheney, knowing what he expressed and what he thought of this country, and how much he and his family have given to this country to keep it together. And so I thought that was a missed opportunity. But to your point, it was a beautiful ceremony. Watching his grandkids, watching Liz Cheney, there were moments where you were chuckling and moments where you were crying, and moments where you felt hopeful again about, to Amber's point, the American dream. If Dick Cheney can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah. Hyma, beautifully said. Thank you for that. I'll say two more things, then we'll move on to Ukraine. Reminder, if you want to be in on the conversation, please raise your hand. And in honor and solidarity with the Cheney grandkids, please don't put smack in the chat today on YouTube. Just delete it if you already put it in there. I doubt you can delete from the chat, but I can dream. Number one, I'll repeat for the third time. If you can't do it today or tomorrow, over the weekend, watch the Cheney grandkids. It's just beautiful. And you'll learn about Dick Cheney in ways you probably didn't know. And then finally, I will say this: it's an ultimate political statement, but it's true, and it speaks to Hyma's point that the president and the vice president, the current ones, were not invited. And had they been invited, I think the president would have gone. Maybe the vice president would have. The Cheneys and the Bushes detest Donald Trump, I think, as much as anybody in America. They really do. Barbara Bush just hated Donald Trump, and the Bush President Bush holds his tongue, but there's white hot passionate hatred, and I use that word advisedly based on reporting. And the Cheneys, again, after what President Trump did, in the Cheney family's point of view to Liz Cheney, there's an intense hatred there, and that's just a reality of the situation. And again, it speaks to how the party has changed under Donald Trump. All right, Ukraine. We said on the morning meeting that Zelensky couldn't just trash the plan because, he can't. He has to at least pretend to try to be willing to amend it. So here is Caroline Levitt at the briefing today. This is 13, Sam, talking about how this plan got developed without input from the Europeans in Ukraine. Number 13, please.
Quite a bit of reporting on the latest with Russia, Ukraine. So let me clarify and give you guys the truth on where it currently stands. President Trump has made it very clear since day one, and even on the campaign trail, that he wants to see this war come to an end. He's grown increasingly frustrated with both sides of this war, Russia and Ukraine alike, for their refusal to commit to a peace agreement. But nevertheless, the president and his national security team are steadfast in seeing this war come to an end, to end the killing and deliver on the president's promise. Special Envoy Witkoff, that Marco Rubio, have been working on a plan quietly for about the last month. They've been engaging with both sides, Russia and Ukraine, equally to understand what these countries would commit to in order to see a lasting and durable peace. That's how you get to a peace negotiation, right? That's how it worked with Israel, with respect to Israel and Gaza and all of the Arab countries in the Middle East. That's how we accomplished that historic agreement, which the UN, by the way, voted to commit to and accept this week, which was a huge monumental moment. So they have been engaged with both sides, and these talks are continuing. As always, I'm not going to litigate the details of this plan as it's ongoing and it's in flux, but the president supports this plan. It's a good plan for both Russia and Ukraine, and we believe that it should be acceptable to both sides, and we're working very hard to get it done. And I'll also add, I know Secretary Driscoll did meet with President Zelensky today. We spoke with him. He was very optimistic following that meeting. And so, again, we are having good conversations with both sides with respect to ending this war.
So obviously made this point before, but one difference between this plan as it was gestated and the Middle East plan is the Middle East plan, the U.S. negotiated with Hamas over the plan. And this was, as far as we know, not negotiated with the Ukrainians before it was promulgated. Speaking of which, do you guys know this guy, Barak Ravid of Axios? He's an incredible reporter. He breaks a ton of stories, and he's broken a number of stories related to the Ukraine. He got the whole plan. He's the first reporter, I think, to get the whole plan. I think we have a graphic that shows some of it here. It's a long plan. A 28-point plan for peace would force Kyiv to give up additional territory in the east, cap the size of its military, and agree it will never join NATO. Never join NATO. According to a draft obtained by Axios and verified by a Ukrainian official, a U.S. official, and a source familiar with the proposal. never join NATO. Kind of incredible. All right, one more thing, and then two more things, then we're going to go to you folks. First, here is President Zelensky did a 4-minute video in Ukrainian and also a tweet finally reacting to the plan. Here's his tweet, 113B. The American side presented points of a plan to end the war, their vision. I outlined our key principles. We agreed that our teams will work on the points to ensure it's all genuine. We're geared up for clear and honest work. Ukraine, the U.S., our European and global partners. Okay, one more thing. We wanted to polymarket this. So with our partners from Polymarket, who soon will be available to you folks in the U.S., more details on that soon, but people from around the world make wagers on different things, weather, sports, news, whatever, politics, international relations. Will there be a Russia and Ukraine ceasefire this year? Will there be a ceasefire this year? Number 14. And you can see less optimistic than Caroline Levitt. Polymarket wagers only have a 9% chance. And you can see it was much higher before. It was well above 60, down to 9%. A little bit surprising to me that it's down 55 percent below its high. Hyma, where do you think we are in this process? Are you more bullish than the Polymarket is?
No, unfortunately, I'm not. And Mark, I was thinking about this a second ago as you were talking about the potential plan. Look, I think we're at a point. I don't even remember what this war is even about. Like, what is Russia trying to accomplish? Why did they invade Crimea and then Ukraine, from the beginning? And so I think Ukraine and they're losing the plot across the board, and people are getting a little disinterested, which is not great. But I don't have a lot of confidence that this war is going to end anytime soon. And unfortunately, the reasons behind it don't seem legitimate. I don't think people even remember what the war was about. And it's kind of hard to ask Ukraine to give even more of its sovereign land to Russia when there was no real reason for Russia to ask for it in the beginning, only to put together what Putin is, his dream of putting the Soviet Union back together.
Amber.
Yeah, I'm also not super optimistic. I mean, even the president has said that he found that this war is a lot stickier than he anticipated when taking office. The plan that's being proposed is pretty similar, from what I've read, to a plan that was suggested last summer by Fred Fleitz and Keith Kellogg, where they do have those land concessions for Ukraine, but it also includes the security guarantees, which, of course, during that infamous Oval Office dust-up, were something that Trump and Vance did not want to discuss in front of the press, and it led to this really uncomfortable moment where Zelensky was essentially kicked out of the White House. Obviously, I think the strategy of starting with Russia and then presenting to Ukraine is attempting to mirror the Gaza peace proposal, and they're kind of hoping that going in that opposite direction might help. But we'll see. I mean, like you said, Mark, Zelensky has to signal publicly that he's open to discussing, but I mean, who knows what he'll actually agree to.
Yeah. All right, a couple more topics, and we'll get to your questions for Amber and for Hyma, so please raise your hand if you want to be in on the conversation. A lot of talk this week about President Trump's trying to talk about the economy in a way that would give people optimism, that he's got a theory of the case here to turn things around in the face of uneven economic news. The markets, for instance, today were not great after a day of a rally based on the NVIDIA earnings. Today, everything was down pretty substantially. Last I looked, at least. I think they closed pretty far down. So the vice president today did this fireside chat with Breitbart. We'll see if there's fire. But here he is, and I've just asked each of you to appraise, does J.D. Vance have game when it comes to feeling the pain of people around the country on the economy? Number 10, please.
Message to the American people who are still feeling like things are unaffordable, who are still feeling like things are rough out there is look, we get it, and we hear you, and we know that there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of wood to chop because the Biden administration put us in such a very, very tough spot. And the way that I think about this is it's always helpful to take this from the abstractions to the actual real things that people are worried about. So take, for example, a dozen eggs. I'll never forget this. It was one of the very first, maybe the single first press conference that the president had done since he had started his second term. And some reporter, probably from ABC, yells at him and says, "What have you done about the price of eggs? The price of eggs are up 300% over the past 3 years." And it's like, it was January the 23rd. It's like, what do you mean, what have we done in 2 days? It's going to take a little bit of time to fix that problem. And so if you're an American who's just struggling to get by, you work hard, you pay your taxes, you want your kids to have good opportunities, and the price of eggs goes from $2 a dozen to $8 a dozen under the Biden administration, and then under the Trump administration, it goes from $8 a dozen to maybe $6.50 a dozen. Well, to you, that is still a major problem. And even though we've made incredible progress, we understand that there's a lot more work to do. And the thing that I'd ask for the American people is a little bit of patience. This economy was not harmed in 10 months. It took a deliberate 4-year administration that was making life harder for everyday Americans, that was importing foreign workers instead of giving jobs to American workers, that was over-regulating, overtaxing, overspending. They were doing everything wrong. And as much progress as we've made, it's going to take a little bit of time for every American to feel that economic boom, which we really do believe is coming. We believe that we're on the front end of it, but we also recognize that we've got a lot of work to do to undo the damage that Joe Biden did to the American economy. And the last point I'll say, Matt, is let's be honest, it's not just Joe Biden. As much as I think Joe Biden was one of the most disastrous presidents of American history, we had a policy in this country for 40 years of shipping American jobs overseas and hiring foreign workers instead of American workers. That has caused the economic stagnation of the American middle class. There was one bright spot in 40 years, and that was the first Trump administration, and there is going to be a massive exception to that 40-year trajectory of American decline, and that's the second Trump administration. We just got to keep it going.
Amber, until the vice president comes to the Upper West Side and personally lowers the price of falafel balls at my neighborhood place from $2.50 a ball to less, I'm recused from commenting. So I've turned to you to say what did you think of that answer and its substance and its format and its presentation?
I don't think it was terrible. I probably would advise the White House to not bring up Biden so much. I think you're far enough into the admin at this point that you've kind of got to rest on your own laurels, right? Stand on your own 2 feet. It's very clear that the Trump administration realized after the elections a couple of weeks ago that affordability was a bigger issue in people's minds than they realized. And there's a very clear pivot that's happening. I've been getting more emails from the White House communications shop about economics and affordability. Trump did this event with the McDonald's franchisees earlier this week. JD Vance talking about it there. But I think the most notable shift, the one that strikes me as the most important, is that before those elections, Trump and Vance were talking about the economy like it was great. Now what we're hearing is we're making progress, but we haven't done enough yet to earn the trust of the American people. So they're making very clear now that the job is not done.
Yeah. Hyma, as a former DNC guy, you must just look at that thing and think like, where's the negative ad in this? Right?
I mean, I'm like going crazy over here, but I agree with everything that Amber said. Look, the JD Vance and Donald Trump sound a lot like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris 2.5 years ago. And here's the reality. This economy, yes, while it is still strong, there are levers that have been pulled by both Trump 1, Biden 1, and now Trump 2 that have not been advantageous for getting this economy back humming. And I think people like to forget about that big pandemic we had in 2020 that wrecked our economy and our supply chain. And then on top of that, President Trump decided to give all of that free money, all of those checks that people were so in love with, that Trump decided to put in people's pockets before he left office. That caused a lot of inflation. And that's just a reality. We've not been able to subside from that inflation for the last 5 years. And that's just a reality. And so I think, JD Vance, the vice president, sounded condescending, and he should. This is a man who wrote Hillbilly Elegy just a few years ago, someone who grew up in an impoverished environment, who sees the American dream. He should be a little better at talking about these things. And what he's doing, and he is, like, to Amber's point, he mentioned Joe Biden like 5 times in that statement.
Yeah.
Look, Joe Biden is not the president. He will never be the president ever again. And Donald Trump, who is the president for another 3 years, JD Vance, who would like to be president in 2028, they've got to have an economic vision that's going to not only build trust with the American people, but it's going to actually prove that they're doing things to lower costs. Reciprocal tariffs across the board, tariffs on footwear, tariffs on coffee, which they've decided on. All of these things have made the economy less stable. And so all of what JD Vance just said, it's almost moot to a point that it's disgusting, because we're all watching this and we all see what's happening, and we all see that Donald Trump told us that he would lower costs on day one. He said that. We all knew that that was not right. And so JD Vance, to be cynical about an American person asking the president what he's going to do to lower their eggs 3 days in, when he promised us last year he would lower costs on day one, is a slap in the face. And so what they've got to do is, over the next couple of weeks, just not just email the Daily Caller and Fox and everybody and CNN and MSNBC these press releases. They've got to actually prove that they're doing things to lower costs. It's not just about PR and media. This is about actual lowering costs. And they have the opportunity to do it still. It's still early in the presidency, but they have not proved to do that over the last 9 months, 10 months.
Yeah, very well said. And to buttress what you both said, the polls are overwhelming. Latest, the Fox News poll, American people are not blaming Joe Biden. They're saying, Donald Trump, you've been president for a while. This is on you. All right, one more topic that I just want to play for you, because I want you both to preview tomorrow's meeting between the mayor-elect, Mr. Mamdani of New York City, and the president. Kind of insane. Like, he's coming to the Oval, and the president's still calling him a communist, and Mamdani's still, saying he's not going to let the police deal with ICE. Here's Caroline Levitt rolling out the welcome mat, but dousing it in kerosene. This is number 16, please.
I'll just add, it speaks volumes that tomorrow we have a communist coming to the White House, because that's who the Democrat Party elected as the mayor of the largest city in the country. I think it's very telling, but I also think it speaks to the fact that President Trump is willing to meet with anyone and talk to anyone and to try to do what's right on behalf of the American people, whether they live in blue states or red states or blue cities, in a city that's becoming much more left than I think this president ever anticipated in his many years of living in New York himself.
Hyma, when I get around to writing my profile of Caroline Levitt, that might be the opening anecdote, that what she said there. But I saw you shaking your head, so floor is yours.
I mean, oh my God! And look, if as I mentioned earlier, the president has yet another opportunity to lower the temperature. I know we're not going to talk about that video and the response the president had, but the American people are looking at the president to show leadership in these instances. If he feels like Mamdani is going to be a bad mayor, what can we do to help him succeed? The city of New York is a very important city for America, and we can't afford to waste time with the president calling the mayor-elect a communist. I mean, look, to Caroline's point about he'll meet with anyone, this is the man who met with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia just a couple of days ago in the White House, rode the red carpet out, met with Vladimir Putin, met with Xi, met with all of these folk, and you're going to call the sitting American mayor or mayor-elect of New York City a communist? That is both disgusting, irresponsible, and it does not behoove the president of the United States of America to use that kind of language of another elected official when he's meeting with literal dictators, literal people who've treated their own people in their country so poorly. And this is a man who the New Yorkers duly elected, who they feel like can bring them some hope around lowering costs, around safety. And so if I were the president, I would say what I heard is some of the same people who voted for him voted for AOC and voted for Mamdani. There's a Venn diagram of need. And what they're saying in New York and what they're saying in Virginia and what they're saying in New Jersey is they need costs to be lower. Childcare costs are too expensive. Healthcare is too expensive. People are struggling every day. It's not about electing a communist or a socialist. It's about electing someone who they feel likes listening to them and who responded to their needs and responded to what they were saying for all these months, all these years. And so I think it's just disrespectful. I think it's disgusting. And I think it's unfortunate.
Thank you, sir. Amber.
I wouldn't go so far as to call it disgusting. I think strategically it's pretty stupid. I mean, I don't think the description of him as a communist is like really that far off the mark. But do you say that when you're inviting him to the White House to try to make sure New York City doesn't collapse? Then that's probably not a wise thing to do. I would just also point out, on the Saudi thing, Biden gave the guy a fist bump. Like, let's be real. We're talking about presidents dealing with who is at least, technically an American ally. Presidents have to meet with people all the time who are awful figures. That's part of the game. So I don't think it's fair to criticize the president for that.
Also well said. Thank
I'm
yeah.
just to clarify, I'm
Yeah.
okay with, I'm not saying that's a critique. What I'm saying is if he's okay with meeting with those horrible people and saying that they're good people, you can't call the mayor-elect, an American citizen of New York, a communist. Like that's just not correct and
Yeah.
not right.
Yeah, and we're going to move on. A quick word from a sponsor, then your questions, and I'm willing to take all the heat you wish in the chat for not covering that ridiculous story. And again, the president shouldn't call for members of Congress to be killed. I'm not saying I'm treating that lightly, but I find the whole thing to just be a distraction from more important stories. Here we go. Word from our sponsor, and then your questions. Please raise your hand if you want to be in the conversation. Another big sale exclusively for two-way community members. Black Friday discount at brickhousesale.com. Go to brickhousesale.com for 30% off. Does your doctor, when you go to the doctor, do they ever say 30% off your bill? No, they do not. But the doctors at Brickhouse Nutrition do. They have their Black Friday 30% off sale. Most impressive health and nutrition products in the industry available to you now 30% off, like Lean, the doctor formulated weight loss supplement for people who want to lose meaningful weight without injections that'll mess you up. 30% off creatone, designed exclusively for women to help you look leaner in shape and toned without extra exercise or dieting. And then 30% off even Field of Greens, the only super fruit and vegetable drink shown in a university study to actually slow aging. Field of Green promises better health results that your doctor will notice. Again, right now, every Brickhouse product, better sleep, superior collagen, 30% off. The sale will not last forever because nothing does. Visit brickhousesale.com. Save 30% off brickhousesale.com. Here we go to your questions. And we start with David. David, welcome in. Thank you for being part of Two Way. Unmute and your question for Amber and for Hyma.
Hi, nice to be on. I would say my question really is about there's a story that came out yesterday from Christopher Rufo about a fraud ring in Minnesota where they stole billions of dollars in Medicaid. And there's been so much hype on and discussions around Israel and foreign aid and support. And it seems like all the people that claim to be America First, claim to be against foreign support for Israel, seem to like completely not even care about the story. And it leaves me with the assumption that the only reason that they only focus on Israel, but never any of these other topics, is because of anti-Semitism and is because it's Israel.
Yeah.
Where am I wrong on that, and what am I missing?
Yeah. David, it's a great question, really well framed. You speak for millions when you ask it, and it's a complicated topic. I didn't read the Rufo story, but I get it from the context. Hyma, you first, and then Amber, as best you can, address what David asked about, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. And look, I think the president and Congress and even local leaders have talked about sort of waste, fraud, and abuse a lot. And so I do think that needs to be looked at very closely. And if we look, there are a lot of Democrats like me who believe in efficient, smaller government that directly delivers services to the American people. And I've talked about this on this all the time. Services are very important, but with that is accountability. And I think there's a lot of accountability that we're not talking about. But to your other point, I think what I've been disappointed in and what I've heard from some of my friends who are conservative and who are independent who voted for President Trump, he's spent most of his time in the last 9 months out of the country. The last time President Trump did an American rally was during the inauguration. He hasn't visited an American state in quite some time. He doesn't do a lot of domestic policy. And while he is on one hand a lame duck two-term president, he's appearing and acting as if he's not, but he's not backfilling that with domestic policy work that's been beneficial to one, accountability for things like this. If you want to look at waste, fraud, and abuse, let's look at it and let's really hit it on the head. But more importantly, let's spend a lot of time in this country instead of trying to solve everybody else's wars, everybody else's issues. Let's solve America's problems.
Thank you for that. Amber.
Oh, I agree. Trump definitely needs to focus more on domestic policy. In regards to this story, I encourage everyone to read it. It's in the City Journal. It's incredibly shocking. And I think to answer your question, David, on why more people aren't paying attention to it, I think the hyper focus on Israel is one reason. The other reason, having worked in conservative media for my entire career, it is often the case that big news broken by conservative or independent outlets does not get covered by the rest of the media. we are often dismissed. There's the assumption that our reporting doesn't pass the same journalistic standards that the Washington Post or the New York Times uses, and so they choose to ignore it, either if it's politically inconvenient or because they don't want to have to give credit to City Journal or Daily Caller, or in this case, Chris Rufo.
Yeah.
So I do agree with that, though. I would say if Chris Rufo came out with the same story saying Ben Shapiro got $1 billion in funds transferred to Israel, and you just changed Somalia and Muslims and Minnesota with Jews, whatever state, and Israel, it would be everywhere. We had a whole story about a pedophile that was arrested in Vegas for like 3 days. That was nonstop coverage. Yet over $1 billion stolen from Medicaid funds going to another country won't get a peep.
Yeah. David, it's hard to argue with the points you're making, the examples you're giving. You're onto something, and I want to highlight what Amber said. It's even more insidious, I think, than what Amber said regarding why great conservative journalism is so often ignored. It's a host of things. Amber said some of them, but it's also just rank discrimination and not wanting to empower journalists who they don't agree with and whose agenda they don't share. It's really insidious, and my heart goes out often to all my friends who write for places like the Daily Caller who deserve credit for their professional accomplishments. All right, Lenny, all anybody wants to talk about is your room, but I know that's not a real background, so I'm less impressed. Welcome in. Thank you for being here. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind.
Am I audible, Mark?
Yes, sir. Hear you well.
Okay. This is a former screened-in porch that I spent 50 grand turning into my office. It's real. I just
get up and go pull a book off the shelf.
okay. You want me to?
I do. Hyma, he's not going to. It's going to be like The Great Gatsby. There's no those books. If there are books, those pages aren't cut.
How about
Jesus Christ? That's a real room.
Space race?
All right, Lenny. Lenny. That's
epic battle
that's
between
crazy.
America and the Soviet Union for dominion of space.
I don't care how great that screened-in porch is, my man. That's an upgrade. Beautiful. All right.
Yeah, it's a nice piece of work. I must say the contractor did it well.
Yeah.
Reasonable.
All right. Floor is yours.
I want to just push back on one single thing, Mark, and that is that I agree that Trump's call, his bleat to execute those Democrats it's not going to happen. It's not serious, but I think it's a powerful marker of his moral depravity, to be blunt about it. Those Democrats called on the soldiers of the United States to obey the United States law, which requires you as a serving member of our armed forces to refuse illegal orders. They did not call on them to defy all orders.
Yeah, I agree.
Only illegal orders.
Yeah.
Trump's immediate, instinctive, morally revealing response was to call for their arrest, trial, and execution. I mean, that is serious. And it reflects as well on his first term forgiveness for war criminals in our military who were turned in by fellow soldiers for killing and mutilating prisoners and so on.
Yeah. So Lenny, I hear you, and
right.
you know I largely agree with you. Part of why I don't want to cover this story, and I'm not objecting to you bringing it up, is I don't want to give the president's ridiculous statement any oxygen. I don't want to credit it in any way, even though I understand why it bothers people. But here's what I'd ask people in the two-way community. While some of this is crocodile tears, I have no doubt that I've heard from people who are genuinely outraged by that video. Okay, they're genuinely outraged by it. Even though, as you correctly point out, all they did in the video was say, if you get an unlawful order, you should not carry it out. So I think part of what two ways about is I'd ask everybody who's genuinely outraged, not faux outraged, to explain why in better detail than I've heard. When they just say it's seditious or they're inciting, disloyalty or whatever. If there's a real explanation, because those are not, give it. And then I'd ask people who are outraged by the outrage to listen, because there's something there that you and I, Lenny, don't see in that video. I see nothing wrong with that video. I don't get it really, but we don't see anything wrong. But I'm telling you, there are people who are genuinely outraged by it. And
Yeah,
I'd like there to be some understanding rather than escalate to the president says they should be killed, and then the Democrats say the president's outrageous. That doesn't help anybody. But
I, I,
your
I think
point's well taken.
your point too. I think
Yeah,
it's very important to try to understand why people
yeah,
react that way.
yeah. Okay,
And by the way, the
yeah,
much more important story is the
yeah,
outright call for Ukraine's surrender.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, we
the,
talked
the,
about that. That's kind of a crazy story. Lenny, I got to go because I got to sneak another sponsor in, or we won't be able to pay the bills, and I'll be doing the show in the dark. Quick word from our sponsor, Lenny. Thank you. And that is Ethos. Ethos.com/two-way gets you an opportunity to get from the online platform that makes getting life insurance fast and easy a quote in as little as 10 minutes. If you're the breadwinner in your family and you don't have life insurance, you are putting your family at great peril to not be able to make tuition payments and rent, mortgage, etc. Now's the time to make sure that your family can keep up with lost income if that becomes necessary. Ethos is an online platform that makes getting life insurance fast and easy. Not a complicated process, 100% online, no medical exam. Just answer a few health questions. You get a quote in as little as 10 minutes. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos. Again, you get a free quote at ethos.com/two-way, ethos.com/two-way. Application times may vary. Like many things in life, things vary. Rates may vary too, but go right now to ethos.com/two-way to get yourself a quote. All right, let's see. I'm checking the clock. Caleb, you're going to come in, but you're going to have to give your thing in 30 seconds. If you go over 30 seconds, a loud chime will sound.
All right. Thank you,
Go.
Mark.
30 seconds on the clock. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'm calling from the UK. Hyma, thank you. I must quickly push back on what you said, because I watched the same JD Vance video and you termed it condescending. Now, if you say Trump comments were condescending, I would agree with you in a way, but I don't think the video that was played, JD Vance sounded condescending. In fact, I think he was trying to explain. I don't think he didn't try to show empathy. He explained that, okay, prices are still high. It didn't sound like there was no affordability issue. So for you to say condescending, that sounds like you are really, really like exaggerating what he said there, unless we didn't watch the same video. I wanted to push back on that. My question to you is that how will Democrats solve affordability issue if given power? That's my question to you. And I think Mark raised something now about how the people on the other side would have.
Caleb, I know you're near. I know you're near the Greenwich line where time is kept, but 30 seconds in the UK can't be that long. I didn't understand your question. I apologize. Hyma, did you? If you understood it, all right. Never mind then. Thank you, Caleb. Hyma.
I understood it. I don't want to answer, but I understood it. No, just
All
kidding.
right. Yeah.
No, I respectfully accept your opinion, Caleb, and I think the vice president would probably appreciate knowing that he is resonating with some people. So it was good to hear your comment on that, and I have no pushback on you on that. But look, I have spent a lot of my career speaking on behalf of Democrats and working for Democrats. I fortunately do not do that now, and so I don't have to go out and campaign for them. But what's going to happen over the next couple of months and going into the 2026 midterms, I'm hoping that Democrats are going to lay out a plan. So one of the things that they're going to talk about is healthcare. You know, we've had this conversation about the ACA and Obamacare for all these years. Oh my God, it's been almost 20 years now. And so I think Democrats are going to come up and say, look, I know there have been some issues with ACA, with Obamacare, here, with some subsidy, all this stuff. Here is an addendum to that plan and how we can further bring healthcare costs down. Additionally, what I've seen is some of the governors like J.B. Pritzker in particular and Wes Moore, Mark Healey, what they are talking about is economic development in their own states and how to connect jobs. And so if you see Democrats who are governors, doing direct job, that's been something notoriously that people like Greg Abbott and Governor Kemp have been really good at. And so the Democratic governors are trying to get really good at creating jobs in their states as well as a part of the economic sort of package. And then that last part, inflation has been a conversation we've been having for such a long time now, and it feels like almost something that nobody wants to solve. And so Democrats, as they're running for Congress in 2026, they're going to have to be very honest about their plans for addressing that from a congressional perspective. And so I don't have a direct answer to you, Caleb, for it, but I think we're gonna have what we should do, as American citizens and as people of this world, is hold the Democrats accountable to presenting their plans to us over the next year. If they want to take over Congress, they should tell us exactly what they're going to do, and I hope that's what we're going to see.
Caleb, thank you. All right, some stuff to tell about real quick. Meghan McCain joins Michael Moynihan on the Moynihan Report premiere on YouTube right now. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time. It's the morning meeting. Sean and Dan, last episode. So join us for that. And then at 4 o'clock, not the normal 6 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock here on the Two-Way platform, a special edition of Two-Way tonight, last of the week. So join us at 4. Now available on YouTube and as a podcast. New episode of Next Up. Erica Donalds, education expert and maybe the future First Lady of Florida, joins me to talk about fixing education in this society. Patty Solis-Doyle, one of the smartest Democrats on presidential politics ever, literally ever, joins me to talk about both Donald Trump's current political standing, and also we talk a lot about AOC and Gavin Newsom and where they stand in terms of potential candidates. And then my reported monologue is on the people on the far left saying Donald Trump's presidency is over, and Donald Trump saying he's the greatest president of all time. And I did lots of reporting with people who are maybe a little bit more subtle and nuanced, and talked about exactly what Hyma said, which is this isn't about can he feel people's pain. It's about can he actually make the economy better, and talk about what the ingredients of that might be. Couldn't be more grateful to you all for being here. Amber and Hyma, just love having you two on so much. And I loved everything you said about Dick Cheney. And don't forget to go read the piece on the Daily Caller about Neil's piece. Thank you. Neil's piece about working with Dick Cheney for 8 years. Thank you for being part of Two-Way. I'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Have a great night, everybody.